All right, welcome to the Breakfast with the Fat Man again. I haven't done one of these in a little while, but this is my breakfast at the moment. I actually was going to get a bowl of cereal out, but I got dominated in doing a bunch of other videos, and I want to wrap this up because that way my wife doesn't get any really irritated at me. She's getting close to her time when she wants to get up, and the cat wants to get fed, and we'll get some lunch going here soon, so it's actually past, not quite breakfast anymore. I watched a video last night that from a fellow that obviously is part of a series of a group of people that do a number of videos, and they're very well established, and they've got several in the tens of thousands of subscribers, if that tells you anything. And so you probably all heard of this person. It's Taking 20, and his video is the worst character creation tables or worst character creation taboos for D20. And it looked like mostly his stuff he's focused on the 5th edition for Dungeons and Dragons. And once again, I get it, I understand, and as Lee has mentioned recently, why do we always go to the Dungeons and Dragons? Why not this game or that game or some other game? Well, the truth is, if you look at the questions this particular person was presenting, the 5 or 6 things that were considered during character creation, bad ideas during character creation, are applicable to any game system, right? It doesn't. Dungeons and Dragons is just the biggest one everybody knows, and that's the truth. So when I looked at some of the stuff, I got thinking, there's some good stuff here, some stuff that I don't know, right? Is it worthy of 20,000 plus subscribers? I don't know. If he's got good editing. That much I do know. So, I wanted to talk on 2 parts of this that actually are the 2 sides of the same coin. Creating backstory for our characters as a player. Now, as a GM, we also create backstory. We create lots of backstory. We create backstory for our campaign worlds, for some of our NPCs, some of our bad guys. Sometimes we do a bad job of not creating backstory. And as this fella in the Taking 20 videos points out, not doing any kind of preparation work is actually, as a game master, is doing our players a disservice. In a way, it's like telling them we don't care enough about them and their opinions and their wants and needs to make an effort at all, which is always a terrible thing to do as a GM. It's just that's beyond lazy. That's not being a GM at all. That's just kind of taking up space. You might tell people, I've got it all in my head. Sure, good. I'm great you have that kind of eclectic memory and have the ability to, improvise so well that nobody's going to notice that you didn't bother to spend 15 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour of your time, of our precious time, to do something for your players for that next game session. I've run into a few game masters like that, and oddly enough, or not so surprisingly enough, within a short order, I end up finding myself running a game for the group, and that particular GM becoming a player again because they discovered that playing and running the game is a completely different set of dynamics, and there's a lot more work involved being a game master if you want to do it, at least a passable method. And that's just my opinion on this, right? I'm sure you guys have your own opinions, and they're invited to them. Enjoy them. I want to know about them. So, as we talk about too much backstory, or not enough, as in no backstory, being a good or a bad thing, bad ideas. This is basically bad ideas, having too much backstory. Now, one of the problems, and you're all familiar with it, I know it, is if somebody will come in with 5 pages of backstory. They've done such a heavy depth of backstory of their character. What they probably didn't bother, though, was to take into account that they're going to be members of a group of other players. So what they have is this neo-lone wolf character that's got such a well-established character behind it that the others pale in comparison and may feel left out in some aspects. There's such a thing as having backstory to get you some flavor going to talk about the type of person, the personality, or the reason they think the way they do for some of the stuff they do. That's fine. because, that's how we introduce our characters to the other characters. But part of the backstory is or I should say, the current. We get our backstory, and it's called a backstory for a reason, because the current story is the stuff that comes after the backstory. This is what's going to develop as a collaboration between the other players and themselves and the GM. We're all going to create a story that we're all going to become part of, and we're going to work on it. We're going to collaborate on it. That's one of those interesting pieces. I got that book out in the truck again. Is that fate system that I'm reading through? Is that they emphasize on everybody, contributing to an ongoing story, and we do that in D&D too. So to suggest that fate suddenly invented this idea is it was kind of crazy in my aspects. I just think that they just did a better job of putting it to the front in such a manner that people are encouraged to do it, and not so much have to ad lib it as we go. So having too much backstory obviously is not necessarily a good thing. And as for the GM, too much backstory. You could spend too much time working on the history and the mythology of the realms that you're creating and the adventure that you're going to spin up, that you forget the meat and potatoes of the current day or the current timeline. And so when we go into that development stage, when we introduce the game, now we could spend an entire session one basically talking about our back histories. By the time everybody gets a chance to do all these elaborate histories and backstories, then the GM gets their time to explain everybody about how grand and deep and old the world is. First off, the session's over. Second, most of us have fallen asleep because while we, at some point, you only absorb so much in such a certain amount of time. This sort of stuff would actually be better off if everything was put together in a little booklet where you could then hand everybody a copy that they could take home and read at their leisure. That's kind of different kind of way to do it. But in this aspect, the taking 20 fellow was implying that, we take too much backstory and we diminish our fellow players in some manner because they're not as part of that extensive backstory. And then there's that also concept, if you're starting junior characters, you're coming in with the lower rank levels, you're going to start at level 1, 2, whatever. How is it that a level 1 character has this huge, massive backstory? About all these adventures they did and all this great, things they learned and so on and so forth, then why aren't they much more experienced than they are? And if it's just all about their, life in their village and being raised by their parents and things like that, is it overly necessary? Can you not condense that somewhat? Something to be thinking about. So the other side of that, of course, is not enough backstory, i.e. no backstory. And that's actually two different things. Having absolutely no backstory at all is the same thing as a GM coming to the table having done absolutely nothing for the session. I have not had any time to sit down and create something for this session. I didn't bother. When I hear people say, I just didn't have any time, bullshit. I'm sorry for the derogatory commentary, but that's the truth. That's just straight bullcrap. You do have time. You chose not to make any of it, or use any of it that way. If your campaigning days are so crammed together with your real world scenarios and stuff that you got to do, and you can't find 20 minutes or half an hour in that week, then maybe you need to either stretch your game sessions out so you're only meeting once a month or once every couple of weeks so you can do that, find that time, or you need to get off your butt and make that time happen. You need to devote some of it. If it means getting your butt out of bed 20 minutes early in the morning so you got a minute to sit in the bathroom with a notebook and make a few things, or doing it at your lunch break at work, we can make that time happen. It's just that if you really want to play well, if you really want to be a good GM, it's part of being invested in it. You're investing your time in not only in your campaign, but in your character's entertainment, your players' entertainment. You want your players to walk away from the table wanting more. And to do that, you have to put a little bit of work. Now, do you need to do that every single time? If you're good at management, you're good at scheduling, you could sit down on a weekend and maybe plot 2 or 3 sessions in advance and get the bare bones in there to get the outline created that you want to do, keeping in mind that no plan ever survives meeting the enemy. And in aspects of the GM meeting the players are going to do things and say things and take the game in an angle that you may have not prepared for. And so trying to create a script for 3 weeks in advance can get frustrating if the players suddenly go off that script and you're desperate to try to bring them back because you don't want to spend another hour next week or 2 hours next week trying to concoct a new. It's part of the challenge, right? So from the character's perspective, from a player perspective, I've sat down and I made that mistake a few times where I didn't absolutely no backstory, even if it was just a paragraph. An ideal minimalist backstory is not that complicated. So Joe became a fighter because, or Luann is a caster because, and that's enough to give a little bit of flavor as why this character is doing what they do and who they are. And at least enough to give that introduction to the other players. And then we're going to build on that stuff. We're all going to collaborate into a new a current story that becomes a backstory, adds to our past and our flavor. So, having nothing, that just implies you don't really care enough about your fellow players and the GM, who's probably spent a whole lot more time than you have working on that week's gaming session to have done a little bit of your own homework. It's like those people who, if I call and I say, okay, we're going to set up a new campaign, and next Saturday we're going to get together and game. You need your character, come up with a character, shoot me an email with it, what have you, let me know so I can get a look at it. And then you show up next Saturday and you think, I just didn't have time to do it, and let's just do it now. Well, that's crude. That's kind of rude, and it shows that you don't care enough about the gaming session in the first place to spend a little bit of your precious daily time to do your part. So having to show up and everybody have to wait on you to create that character, unless you're an ad lib, you just walk in at the last moment. That's one thing. But if you knew you were going to be involved and you didn't bother to take the time, you're lazy and you're discourteous to your fellow players and the GM. I'm just saying it's not right. And so that concept of having no backstory, in my opinion. So I'm always, as always, would be interested to know your version and your takes on this and what you think on that subject. I mean, I know right now we're all really invested in my 31-day challenge, my RPG a day challenge for 2018, and so we're kind of subletting some of our other videos until this is over, which is fine. Hey, we're back to that. Some of us only got so much time in a given day or a week, and we got to maximize our time, and that's fine. That's just great. But at some point down the road, this is a topic that's worthy of discussion and opinions. And how can we improve things? How can we not fall into that trap? Are there tricks? What are your tricks for having a good backstory without over elaborating or having some preparation time in advance? So things that you don't have to dominate or rush around the last minute to try to fill in the gaps. Because I'm pretty sure that most of you are good GMs and you don't come to the table ill-prepared, as in no preparation whatsoever. I mean, we can't always prepare for everything. That's the truth. That's the nature of it. But we should still make our effort, and that goes doubly so for the player. GM and the player together, we make a collaborative effort. We're all in it together. Kind of like these channels that we deal with. We're all here to help each other out. It is what it is. So next time, game on.